The tragic story of Anne Frank was all too common in Europe during the Holocaust, but because of the words she left behind, the world will never forget her.
She's just like any one of us. She was very physical, she was very funny, she was very social.
Serves as a symbol of the human spirit that is indomitable even under the most horrific circumstances.
Anneliese Marie Frank was born on June 12, 1929 in Frankfurt, Germany, to Otto and Edith Frank. The German Jewish family lived on the outskirts of Frankfurt for the first 5 years of Anne's life.
Her family had been successful bankers and business people for 300 years. And when Hitler came into power, he scapegoated the Jews and other people he didn't like.
In 1933, after the Nazis seized power and the anti-Semitic propaganda increased, Otto decided to move his family to Amsterdam. Anne arrived last in February of 1934, after living with her grandparents in Aachen. Once the Germans took over the Netherlands in 1940, Anne and her sister Margot began attending a Jewish public school. In June of 1942, as the Second World War raged, Anne received a diary.
Otto gave Anne the diary for her 13th birthday. He knew they were going into hiding. He was very concerned about this very physical, excitable girl being quiet.
One of her first entries in the book reads, "I hope I will be able to confide everything to you."
She turned to writing, reading, and observation. She really understood the creative process, that it's okay to be confused. It's okay to experiment. It's okay to be self-critical.
In 1942, German authorities, with the help of Dutch collaborators, began to concentrate Jews from the Netherlands in the Westerbroek, a transit camp near the German border. From there, the Germans would deport them to the death camps at Auschwitz and Sobibor. It was around this time Otto moved Anne and her family into hiding in an attic behind the office of the family-owned business. They would live in this space, which Anne referred to as the secret annex, eventually being joined by 4 Dutch Jews as well.
You really got a sense in those rooms that there's no nature and you can't go outside. And the chestnut tree was out the window. And she nurtured herself by looking at the sky and by looking at that tree and watching the seasons pass and realizing that nature was still functioning.
Anne chronicled all of her thoughts and emotions. She wrote of her fears, ambitions, and amazingly enough, even optimism.
And she spent about a page and a half really examining hate and came to the realization that hate was a common emotion, and it is a common emotion. And it's not to be denied, but it's not to be acted upon for the good of the community.
In August of 1944, the Franks' worst fears became reality when they were discovered by the Gestapo through an anonymous tip. Within a month, the Franks and the other 4 annex residents were put on a train to Auschwitz. Because of their youth, Anne and Margot were chosen for labor and transferred to Bergen-Belsen. Anne's life ended at 15 in Bergen-Belsen in March of 1945, when she and her sister Margot died of typhus. Their deaths came just weeks before the British liberated the camp. Anne's mother had already died in January of 1945 in Auschwitz. Otto would survive the war and eventually return home to learn he had lost his entire family. After the Franks were found by the Gestapo, family friends found some papers and a diary Anne had kept during her time in the secret annex. Miep Gips, one of the family friends who helped hide them, kept the diary. When Otto returned, Miep held on to the diary, hoping Anne may have survived. When they received official word of her death, she turned the diary over to Otto. When Otto read the diary, he realized Anne hoped to one day publish it. Initially reluctant, Otto eventually fulfilled his daughter's wishes by publishing the diary in Dutch titled The Secret House in 1947.
Otto was reluctant to have people hear about his marriage, hear about how Anne felt about her mother, hear about sexuality, his daughter's sexuality. But without this diary, the world would be a different place.
The book became a literary landmark and has been translated in many languages. In 1952, Anne's tale of unthinkable adversity was made available in English, fittingly titled The Diary of a Young Girl, providing a very human face to a horrific chapter of history. As her story became more well-known, people were interested in seeing the secret annex where Anne and her family hid. On May 3, 1960, the Anne Frank House officially opened as a museum.
Anne Frank's diary gives us a look into how the Holocaust affected the individual. We know the number of 6 million Jews, but we see in this diary how it affected a single young girl.
Her legacy is that she can teach us that it's important to stop hate before it escalates into genocide, which unfortunately it continues to do around the world.
To be reading the Diary of a Young Girl. You are going to be writing an essay, and so in the essay, the writing prompts on my screen. Enter introduction to the public version of Anne Frank's diary. First, former Lady Eleanor Roosevelt said that Anne Frank's story made her, and then we have the quote there, and so we see that it's saying that it made her aware of the degradation, and we've talked about degradation, humans participating in environmental degradation, but what's degradation of the human spirit? And so looking at that, but also Eleanor Roosevelt said that she saw the ultimate shining nobility of that spirit. And so basically the good and the bad, and you're going to find human nature, and you're going to find that in Anne Frank's diary. But you're going to have to take that when you're writing your essay and compare and contrast it to the degradation and the nobility of the human spirit during current present day coronavirus, because we can't say we're in the same situation as Anne Frank. By no means. We are not stuck in a house for 2 years. No. But we are still seeing the same degradation of the human spirit and nobility of the human spirit. And so we want to talk about that. We want to relate the two. So again, you're reading the book, and as you're reading the book, you're going to be creating an essay. Now, on your directions, I want to remind you all that I cannot see where my screen is recording. If I'm on WeVideo, if I'm recording my desktop and I'm recording myself, it doesn't show me where this hole is on my face. So I apologize. So what you're going to do is you're going to be creating an essay. I'm not requiring that we have a conclusion paragraph. I'm just requiring, or Ms. Sherville and I are just requiring that you have an introduction paragraph, a first body paragraph, and a second body paragraph. And so when we're looking at that, you're going to have the intro. Your first body paragraph is going to talk about the degradation of human spirit, and your second body paragraph, your third paragraph total, is going to talk about the shining nobility of the human spirit. This should say spirit. You will see what each paragraph on the paper, on your to-do list, you'll see what each paragraph is supposed to have. And so, for example, this paragraph of degradation of the human spirit, and if you've had my class, you've had the writing formula. So this is going to be almost like the writing formula, except you're going to fall from it a little bit, because there's going to be several sentences in this. You're going to have your main idea sentence. You're going to have your first piece of textual evidence, and our standards say that it has to be cited explicitly. So you're going to cite your textual evidence explicitly. If you need help doing that, contact myself or Ms. Sherville. We will help you do that. And that in this first paragraph is going to be an example in the book, Anne Frank Diary, in the book. Getting tongue twisted. You're going to have an example of degradation of the human spirit. Then you can never cite textual evidence without explaining it. You can't just cite textual evidence without explaining. So your next sentence is going to go into more of an explanation. Then you're going to have a next sentence after this. This is where we're kind of going off what we usually do in class. Your next sentence is going to give us a specific example in today's time that shows degradation during the coronavirus, degradation of the human spirit. And then you're going to use a next sentence to explain that even more. And that next sentence is going to tie it in with how that example ties in with the Anne Frank example. That's your first. So you have to have two examples. You have to have two examples of degradation of the human spirit during Anne Frank's time, and two examples of degradation of the human spirit during our time. So again, the way it'll follow is main idea sentence. So you'll have. Let's erase this. And let me get a different. Okay. So you will have main idea sentence. You will have example from Anne Frank's The Diary of a Young Girl, Anne Frank's Diary. I will put AFD. Example from Anne Frank's Diary. Explicit textual evidence. Then you're going to explain that textual evidence. Explain textual evidence. Remember, our textual evidence, our explanation should be tied in with our main idea sentence. So if your main idea sentence is talking about bananas, but your explanation is not talking about bananas at all, then are you talking about bananas? Are you explaining bananas? Are you giving textual evidence about bananas? And the answer to that is no. So if you are talking about the degradation of the human spirit, your explanation should talk about how this piece of evidence is an example of degradation of the human spirit. Now, you're not going to want to use the word degradation the entire time because otherwise it becomes redundant. But still, there's got to be some synonyms. You're going to have to pull some different things in there to fully explain what your main idea sentence is saying. Then you are going to have a sentence that says, an example of degradation of current day, and then an explanation of how this completely, I hope, I can't tell if you can see that. I'm sorry, I hope I don't have to redo the video. Explanation of how this one and this one tie in together. Then you are going to think I did it wrong on a second example. A second example from AFD, Anne Frank's Diary. So explain that. You've got your second example from Anne Frank's Diary. You're going to explain that example. Then you have to have another example related to this example of degradation of the human spirit. So another current day. Example, and then explain that example. Tied in with the example from Anne Frank's Diary, and then you're going to have a conclusion sentence. So this will get you started on Anne Frank's Diary. You have your introduction to who Anne Frank is. You have your introduction paragraph that you're going to have to create. And so over the next 3 weeks, you're going to create your introduction paragraph. Then you're going to create your very first paragraph, and this is the stuff that it'll have in it, the information that it should have in it. And then I'll make another video for your next. Please make sure you're coming to mine and Ms. Yergler's Google Meet so that you can get help with this. We'll sit and work you through every single sentence and every single example if you'll just meet with us. We miss you very much.